Let's get right to baseball, where it is all about our guy, Erik Halterman from RotoWire. How are you, man?
Would have been a lot better with a Sixers win last night. If we need to fill some time, we can do a little therapy session here. But otherwise, I guess we can move on to baseball.
Yeah, I mean,
Get my
I'm
mind off things.
I'm here for all the ugly numbers about Doc Rivers if you want to get into that at some point. But before we do, we could do a little baseball talk because, of course, this right here, MLB Price Check, and we're going to analyze all the key price points, daily fantasy for what you're looking at for the slate later on tonight. It's not a big one, obviously. You've only got half dozen or so games. So pitchers at 8K or above, Erik, who stands out to you?
Yeah, for a small slate, there's quite a few guys that I like in this price range. Obviously, you got guys like Yu Darvish, Julio Urias facing each other. Two strong options there if you want to pick a side. But a guy I'm going to talk about this morning is Adbert Alzolay of the Cubs at 8,900, a little bit cheaper than some of those top guys. He's coming off a bad start and a trip to the injured list, but those are both due to just a blister, which I think shouldn't be too worrisome. If they say he's good to go, I'm assuming he's more or less at full strength. No real worries about lingering effects there. He's facing a Cleveland team that ranks just 24th by WRC plus on the season and will be without a designated hitter at Wrigley Field. Alzolay has an ERA just north of 4, but a lot of the ERA estimators, XFIP Sierra, have him in like the 360s, some significantly better. He's a guy who last year showed a huge strikeout rate in a small sample, 33.3%, but he combined it with a terrible walk rate of just about 15%. This year, he's actually still a above average strikeout guy at 26.7%, but he's slashed the walk rate all the way down to just below 7%, and he has an above average ground ball rate. So he's really become a solid all around pitcher with a pretty friendly matchup at a mid-tier price. So if you want to avoid some of those top guys, he'd be the guy I'd be looking at.
Okay, so those are the pitchers. Let's dissect some of the hitters. 5K and up. Who do you like best?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jose Altuve at 5,500 here. I'd really be looking at a few Astros tonight. They'll be in Camden Yards, one of the more hitter-friendly parks in the league, against Keegan Aiken, who may have something. I liked his strikeout rate north of 30% last year. Hasn't shown it this year in 4 starts and 4 relief appearances. That strikeout rate's cratered to 21.1%, and he doesn't really do anything else. So that's very much a back-end starter, as you can see from his 5.76 ERA. Altuve will get the platoon advantage against him. I'd like Carlos Correa just south of 5,000, also with the platoon advantage. Altuve, he was a guy that I was foolishly down on heading into the year. I saw his really bad 2020 numbers. Figured, he's heading into his 30s, doesn't have, the extra help he had a few years ago. Maybe this is just kind of the end. Obviously, I didn't think he was, completely devoid of talent or anything. But, when you see a guy in his 30s, you see a normal aging curve, you figure this is the way it's going to go. But if you look at his batting averages the last 3 years, 298, 219, and now back up to 296. It's quite clear that last year was a complete outlier over the course of the rest of his career. And I'm more or less ready to treat him as the same Altuve we've always seen. 16 homers in 60 games already this season too. So he's showing about as much power as ever after hitting just 5 in 48 games last year. And again, while he is in his 30s, he's only 31. So it's not as if we should expect him to be completely done. And he's been hot lately too. 10 homers, 1109 OPS over his last 19 games. So if this is really just Jose Altuve again, I think this is a great time to go with him.
Well, let's not forget, too, in a pandemic-shortened couple-month season, guys can get hot, guys can go in slumps, and you see it all the time over the course of a regular baseball season that generally is much longer, the 162 versus 60. But how about a value bat for you tonight?
Yeah, here's a guy who isn't necessarily bouncing back, and that's Elenio Suarez at 3,900. It has not gone great for him this year. 171 batting average is not what you want, but clearly a 186 BABIP has something to do with that. He's striking out over 29% of the time, but he's had success with a strikeout rate that high in the past. Just 2 years ago, he had a strikeout rate of 28.5%, and he hit 49 homers and while hitting 271. So it's not as if he can't succeed with this level of strikeouts. He is getting some bad luck this year. His expected batting average, expected slugging are both notably higher than his actual numbers. His expected slugging of 431 still isn't great, but it's a lot better than his actual slugging of 364. But the main reason I like him tonight is he'll get the platoon advantage against J.A. Happ, who, in contrast to Jose Altuve, really is at the tail end of his career. He's 38 years old, ERA north of 6. Even the friendlier ERA estimators have him well over 5. Just doesn't strike out anybody, a career low 16.5% strikeout rate. Doesn't keep the ball on the ground either, his lowest ground ball rate in a decade. So I like a bunch of the Reds tonight, and I think Suarez is one of those guys where pretty good chance he gives you 0 points, but especially in those larger tournaments, he still has that power. So he's got a ceiling about as high as anybody in his price range.
Who's an absolute fade for you tonight, Erik?
Yeah, this is interesting. I'm not sure if any of the most expensive starters, who are usually the guys I look at for this, I'm not sure any of them are quite absolute fades. The closest, I think, for me is Aaron Savali. I think if I'm paying up for one of the top guys, I don't want to pay up for somebody with a strikeout rate less than 20%. He's got an ERA 348, but the ERA estimators have him close to a run above that. I really don't think he's a guy who should be in that over 8,000 price range. Also among the expensive starters, I like Yu Darvish and Julio Urias less than I do on most nights, just because they're facing each other. Obviously, can't really plan too much around wins in modern MLB, but you do still want your pitchers to have a good chance of getting one. And when they're facing a guy as good as Yu Darvish or Julio Urias, that is a small knock. So I certainly wouldn't think you're dumb if you go with either of those guys, but I do think that is a knock on both of them.
Well, while I've got you here, and before I let you go, obviously, that's DFS. Let's do the DK Sportsbook just a little bit. Do you have an absolute favorite bet tonight across Major League Baseball?
Yeah, this is going to be related to something I talked about just a minute ago. I'm going to go with the Reds at minus 118 over the Twins. Those two lineups are very similar. Twins are 9th by WRC plus, and they do now have Buxton back, where the Reds are 10th. So not much to separate them there. But J.A. Happ, I already talked about, very shaky for the Twins. Yeah, again, just doesn't strike anybody out anymore. Can't keep the ball on the ground. Doesn't walk people, but if they've already hit it over the fence, that doesn't really matter a ton. Tyler Mahle, on the other hand, is emerging as a true frontline starter. He showed some of it last year when his strikeout rate shot up just shy of 30%, but he also was walking a lot of guys and had a ground ball rate below 30%. This season, the strikeout rate is more or less the same at 29.6%, but he's combined that with a better than league average walk rate and a ground ball rate just shy of league average. So suddenly he's a guy who, strikes out everybody and doesn't have major weaknesses. So he's got a 3.39 ERA that looks very well deserved. So given that, it's a gap of like 2-3 runs in ERA and the ERA estimators between these two pitchers, I think this should be a lot more than 118 for the Reds.